Good evening. Tonight is December 5th, 2017. I'm Paul Glumaz. I'm active with the movement of Lyndon LaRouche. And this is being brought to you by General Welfare Presents. We live in this country, the country of the United States, under a media blackout of reality, both internal and even more so external. The few of you who will be watching this, or the many of you who will be watching this, are essentially getting, it's almost like during World War II when people had to use their short radio, secret radio. They had to listen in on the reports because the Nazi propaganda was just overwhelming, and you couldn't tell by the Nazi propaganda of what was going on in the war. Similarly, you can't know what is going on in the world in the war that is actually occurring from the propaganda coming from the mainstream media. But this propaganda is completely squashing any concept of reality. So you have to go completely outside the mainstream media. Now, most of you who are going to watch this already are doing that. But this is what I'm doing. I'm doing tonight, I'm giving you a battle report in the fundamental battle that's now going on between the world order, the so-called old New World Order, of genocide, depopulation, neoliberalism forever, corporate rape forever, Wall Street, London financial center forever, versus the order that's now emerging around the massive physical economic development that's going on internationally around the Belt and Road. And the order that's emerging, which is a totally different order. It's not based on war. It's not based on geopolitics. It's not based on who's on top and who's on the bottom. This new system is moving very fast into position at the same time that the Wall Street London financial system is getting ready to completely collapse. And why do we know it's getting ready? Because the stock market is going up. Bitcoin is going up. The whole thing is a Ponzi scheme. It's going up. The whole thing is going to pop. We're heading to a pop. But the difference is that a new system is well in its way. A system of agreements between nations for economic development along the Belt and Road, which then becomes the basis then for getting nations to wipe out the bad debt, establish credit systems and development. So tonight I'm going to give you a battle report over what's happened in the last several weeks so you get a sense of this. First of all, there was a conference in Budapest, Hungary, of the 16 Eastern and Central European nations with China. And the host of the conference, Viktor Orban, the president of Hungary, had earlier announced that the center of the world is shifting from the Atlantic to the Pacific. This is very important. The entire world imperial system is based upon the Atlantic system of the British, the Commonwealth, the European Union, and US, Canada, NAFTA, and so forth. And all of that is crumbling. And what's emerging is a world based on the Pacific as the center of trade, but also reaching out from the Pacific to Europe through the Belt and Road, reaching out through the Middle East, going into Africa, similarly, the development of Africa, and also from a maritime standpoint, reaching out to North America and South America. So this is what's going on. Now, there was also a conference of the Schiller Institute, led by Helga Zepp-LaRouche. And this conference was a tremendous success. It involved many members from France, from Europe, from the Middle East, from Africa, and the Chinese representative was a woman who heads the African part of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and she's been involved with Africa for a long time. What's going on is the Chinese are building the infrastructure and the industrial base in Africa, and what she says is that when you do that, you begin to convert the average African who has a tribal identity to an African who has a working class identity, and it's only on that basis that you can deal with the tribal issues that keep the nations very weak. Where whenever an African country has an election, the tribal loyalties create almost civil war circumstances, and you know, until the election is over. You know, so essentially, this is what the Chinese are doing. So this is an example of what the impact that the Belt and Road is going to have on all these countries, which are still governed by tribal, ethnic, religious conflicts, and what have you. In the meantime, okay, at the same time that this was going on, there was a meeting in Uruguay of 2,500 people on the relationship of the Caribbean and South and Latin America with the Belt and Road. At the same time that was going on, there was a conference in Paris on the Belt and Road, which had 400 key people there, and France is being organized to go with the Belt and Road. Meanwhile, the European Union bureaucracy is mobilizing everything they can to block the Chinese investments into the Belt and Road, while the government of Germany is completely paralyzed. They have no vision, no idea where they're going. They want to preserve the existing system, which cannot be preserved. The industrial base of Germany, the industrial side of Germany, wants desperately to end the sanctions with Russia and get on with the economic boom and developing and participating in the Belt and Road with Russia and China and the Eurasian Union. The German companies want export markets. They are ready. Their industrial firm, the industrial heart of Germany, what's still left of the industrial heart of Germany, wants to explode into the development of Asia, of Eurasia. And then at the same time, in the last few days, Shinto Abe of Japan, the Prime Minister of Japan, in hosting a large business delegation from China, announced that Japan should participate with the Chinese. That Japanese construction firms, Japanese companies should participate in the Belt and Road developments throughout Eurasia. And this is very critical because Japan has not been a friend of China, and China has not been a friend of Japan. They have had very severe problems since the atrocities that the Japanese committed during World War II, which are as heinous as anything you've ever seen. And the Japanese still refuse to apologize for what they did. Nonetheless, the Japanese are moving to openly work with the Chinese in the development of the Belt and Road. This is totally freaking out the imperial system of the old New World Order, the New World Order that was supposed to occur after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the New World Order that was supposed to collapse after governments gave up their sovereignty to regional entities like the NAFTA and the European Union and the World Bank and the IMF and the General Agreement on Trade and the World Trade Organization, the Financial Stability Board, and all these institutions that were established to kind of control nations around the financial power, the financial interests controlling the whole thing. That's all breaking apart right now. It's all busting apart, and they're all blaming Trump because he's not coming in on the white horse of war to rescue their chestnuts. Trump isn't trying to rescue Wall Street's chestnuts, except for this tax reform bill, which is nothing but a disguised bank bailout. It's about giving the corporations more funds to be able to prop up their debt, which is another one of the bubbles that's being propped up. So everything we're doing in this country, healthcare, the Obamacare, is nothing but propping up the insurance companies, which are part of the banks, who are bankrupt. The whole system is bankrupt. So so they want to get as much control of the healthcare dollar going into the insurance companies, going into the banks to prop up the banks. The same with the drug trade. The expansion of the drug trade is the same thing. You got to prop up the banks. You have to expand the drug trade. The same thing goes with this tax. Everything is geared towards bailing out the banks. So, or not bailing them out, but keeping the illusion of solvency, which doesn't exist. But the rest of the world understands this, and they're moving into a new system. And Trump is not, going to nuclear war to force everyone into the old new system that no longer is going to exist. So this is the battle report on that. Now, at the same time, we're talking about this. The Chinese Communist Party in China had their first conference with political parties from all over the world, and the Democratic Party came and the Republican Party came. But there were something like 300 parties from 120 countries came to this conference, where the Chinese are building party-to-party relationships. And what the Chinese are saying is, we're not here to impose we're not here to impose the Chinese model, but we don't want any foreign model imposed upon us. But we will work with whatever model you guys want to work with. If you want that model, that's fine, we'll work with you. If you want that model, fine, we'll work with you. So that's the kind of process that's going on. Meanwhile, Alaska, Idaho, West Virginia, Ohio, Pennsylvania, huge Chinese investments are now proceeding, coming off of Trump's visit to China. So that's one aspect of the battle report. Now we come to the internal battle inside the United States, and this is shaping up incredibly. You have the Michael Flynn business, where Michael Flynn it turns out that Michael Flynn was set up. He did not know he was going to be interrogated by the FBI when he went to meet with the FBI. He was meeting with the FBI as NSC director, dealing with and they had already got transcripts of his discussions with Kislyak and so forth, and they set him up. The whole thing was a setup. And we know somebody who has reported to us that in the FBI offices, the 50% of the FBI agents still have portraits of Obama, but none have portraits of Trump. So you have an entire institution called the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which is totally at war with the President of the United States, and intend to remove him. They intend to remove him, and the FBI collective consciousness, the FBI's collective mentality is their job is to remove, their job as the FBI is not to save you from crime, it's to remove the President of the United States. That's the collective consciousness of the FBI. So what's happening right now is that the Congress, under the Intelligence Committee, under Nunez, has demanded that the FBI provide records on the Steele dossier issue, and they have not done so. So they have been warned that if they did not provide the documents by the end of today, which they did not, that they're subject to sanctions from the Congress, from the committee. Now, the former Attorney General, Eric Holder, he was sanctioned, but Obama happened to be president, and he happened to be the Attorney General, and the recommendations for action by Congress could not be carried out because the Obama administration would have had to have carried it out. However, this is a different situation now. Sessions, who recused himself from the Russia issue, is not being named in the sanctions. It's Rosenstein and Mueller, and the FBI and the FBI director. So now you're going to have sanctions placed on the FBI and the Assistant Attorney General, but then Congress can come up with recommendations for action, and Trump could carry those actions out, including recommendations to fire Comey or any kind of recommendation. So this thing is moving into a confrontation between Congress, or the committees in Congress, with the Bureau of Investigation. We haven't seen this since the Church Committee hearings in the 70s. We have a fight on our hands of unbelievable proportions. It is also, Mueller is now going for records of Deutsche Bank to get at Trump's business activities. So now they're going for Trump's business activities. They're going after General Flynn on his business activities with Turkey, and he did not, register as it properly, and they're going after Flynn on the Logan Act, which has never been enforced since the 1830s. It's not a law. It's a law on the books, but it's not technically a law because it's never been enforced. This is according to Alan Dershowitz. So the whole thing is just becoming hokier and hokier. Okay, and they're threatening Flynn to get him to turn on Trump, but there's nothing that he can turn Trump on. Then CBS was caught lying, saying that Trump had issued recommendations to Flynn to talk to the Russians before the election, before he was president-elect, which was a lie. And then the fact CBS was forced to it because they did lie. And the man who did the lying is someone very, very well known to us, Brian Ross, who at the time in 1983 was working for NBC, First Camera, did the similar massive lies about LaRouche, which began the process of going after legally, of the whole process of going after LaRouche began in 1983 with the First Camera episode, attacking LaRouche, and it was Brian Ross, so-called the investigative reporter, that presented all kinds of lies about LaRouche as the first step towards eventually a legal process that led to LaRouche's incarceration in 6 years later.
He works for ABC now.
Now, yes.
Not CBS.
No. He works for ABC, I'm sorry. ABC. I got it wrong. But at that time he was working for NBC. So this whole thing, so he was suspended for 4 weeks. Big deal. But the point is that this is a war. Now, you have to get a sense of this. The people in Washington who are part of the FBI do not consider Trump to be their president. Okay? They do not consider Trump to be their president. They consider Trump to be, the enemy of the system. And they're going to try to get rid of him. So, there's two ways they could do this without assassinating him. The first is to create a situation where Congress can, the lower part of Congress can launch an impeachment proceeding or put together a bill of indictment to impeach the president like they did Bill Clinton. They can claim whatever and then impeach him. But that's a political process. That's being done in the open, and that'll trigger a whole political process in the population because the population is not for getting rid of Trump any more than they were for getting rid of Clinton when Clinton came under the same situation. Clinton was far more popular during the time that Congress was impeaching him, when the Republicans were impeaching him, than he was before that. Okay, so that's a political process, and then if they succeed in doing the indictment, impeachment. Then it goes to the Senate, and 2/3 of the Senate has to vote to removal. And that's another political process where they have an open trial, and all the evidence is presented in the trial in the Senate, and that's in the open. That's in public. That's a whole nother issue. What they're trying to do, what instead is try to separate Trump from the cabinet, separate him from Tillerson, separate him from the cabinet, and have the cabinet come to the Congress and say Trump is not competent to be president, at which point he is removed. Now that's a different process because it comes without a political process directly initially, and then Pence takes over until Trump contests it in the Senate, which could be a month before he comes back in as president. And in that month, you're dealing with essentially a dictatorship run by the system under Pence, and you don't know where it's going to go. And that is a much more explosive political situation, because if they do that, you're going to galvanize a very explosive political situation. But it's not a situation. Then the issue is not an impeachable crime. The issue is competence. Is Donald Trump competent to be president? And so that's what those are the two directions they're driving. Now, right now, the setup that Mueller is running is based upon the conversations with Comey over laying off Flynn. So essentially, President Trump would be indicted in Congress because the FBI can't. The FBI can recommend an indictment of the president, but you can't indict a sitting president. So it would go to Congress that the crime was obstructing justice in asking Comey to lay off Flynn, or allegedly to lay off Flynn. So this whole thing is moving in that direction. As Mueller expands the operation, it's becoming more clear that the people involved, that this whole thing was a setup. And this guy Strzok, who was the leading investigator in the Clinton thing, he did the interviews in the Clinton and the Hillary Clinton case, was the one who changed the language from gross negligence to something of a lesser nature, because gross negligence is a felony, and to extreme carelessness. That's a different. He changed the wording. So basically, he's the same guy that set up Flynn. He's the guy that worked with Comey. He's the guy who set up Flynn. And there's a whole complicated thing with an affair he had with an FBI agent. And the whole thing is now coming out into the Congress, that this was the guy at the center of the whole thing. And we're looking at a war, but it's a war in which, unfortunately, the Democratic Party is, like the Boston Herald is saying, that the Democratic Party, that the FBI is a weaponized tool of the Democratic Party. They're not saying that the FBI has been, since Hoover, a weaponized tool of the British system. And it has been since Hoover has been running the FBI and beyond. It has been a weaponized tool of Wall Street, the City of London, and the British system. But we're not far away from starting to define the actual control of the FBI, because it's the FBI which is at the center of the control. And now it's coming into conflict with Congress, open. And the more open the conflict is, the more potential it is to crush the FBI. You need to crush the FBI. The FBI is your biggest problem. The FBI is not law enforcement. It is a fascist police state. The FBI does not protect you from the drug trade. The FBI protects the drug trade from you. The FBI does not protect you from terrorism. The FBI protects terrorism from you. Okay? That's the FBI. they have their own culture inside the FBI, and they have their own view, exalted view of themselves as the that comes out of those TV shows, Sunset Strip, 77 Sunset Strip, and all these TV shows. They have their own. They believe their own propaganda. They are the biggest scum on the planet. The FBI is the biggest scumbags in the United States. Is the way the FBI, the people who run the FBI, are the biggest scumbags in the United States, and they are there to enforce a political control over the population by picking off people that would stand up for the population. And this is now finally being challenged. So this is another aspect of the battle report that's going on. The issue of Trump and Russia coming together to work together to deal with the drug trade, to deal with the terrorism, and then Trump in a crisis moving in the banking crisis to establish a Franklin Delano Roosevelt Glass-Steagall arrangement and a credit system is the issue. This is the issue. What will Trump do in a financial collapse? This is the issue. And the FBI is the enemy. And it works for the British. It has worked for the British for the last 100 years. Maybe a few years less than that. But that's the FBI. And finally, the FBI is coming into scrutiny. It's coming in to the crosshairs of the battle.